My credibility is not on the line. The international community's credibility is on the line. And America and Congress's credibility is on the line because we give lip service to the notion that these international norms are important.
Well, everyone's credibility is on the line in Syria, except, of course, that of President Obama. The international community, America, Congress, but not our commander-in-chief. That's a spin zone if I've ever heard of one. Now, the president made those comments today while in Stockholm, Sweden, en route to tomorrow's G20 summit in St. Petersburg, Russia. The G20 is a two-day summit of finance ministers, central bank governors, and in this case, heads of state from the world's wealthiest economies. The summit was going to be about recovery for the global recession, but unsurprisingly will be overwhelmed by talk of prospective Syria intervention, and specifically the U.S.-Russia relationship, and even more specifically, a dynamic between President Obama and the Russian President Vladimir Putin, especially since the summit will be held, as we said, on Putin's home turf in Russia. So it's no surprise that many of the questions President Obama faced today in Stockholm were about Syria, and even more specifically about the U.S. relationship with Russia as it pertains to Syria. Here's the president answering one of the many questions he got on that topic today.
Do I hold out hope that Mr. Putin may change his position on some of these issues? I'm always hopeful, and I will continue to engage him because I think that international action would be much more effective.
Always hopeful, Buck.
He's always hopeful. Open chain.
Unfortunately,
there you have it.
Unfortunately, hope, as they teach us, is not a strategy. Obama's frosty relationship with Putin has been, of course, months in the making. And remember, on August 7th, the president canceled the bilateral meeting with Russia at this very summit over Russia's decision to provide asylum to Edward Snowden. So rather than meet with Putin in Russia, the United States will be meeting with Japan, China, and France. In fact, Russian press today released the fact that for the first time ever at a G20 summit, the physical seating at the summit will be altered. They're not going to use Russian, they're going to use English so that the U.S. and Russia can be in different spots at the table. Sometimes the small things really do tell the story. Putin, meanwhile, on the other hand, is projecting confidence and maintaining hard-line Russian stance regarding Syria. In an interview with AP last night, Putin said that any action by the U.S. in Syria without a UN resolution would indeed be illegal, but that Russia somehow could be persuaded to act if there was objective evidence that proved Assad had used chemical weapons. But, of course, that notion is ludicrous. He will never be convinced. It's not their interest to be convinced in this particular topic. So Putin also had this to say. We'll put it up on the screen in the same AP interview. He said, "We have our ideas about what we will do and how we will do it in case the situation in Syria develops toward the use of force or otherwise." So Russia has plans. Now, recent movement in the Mediterranean with Russian warships suggests that's the case, and Putin continues to threaten the proliferation of missile defense systems like the S-300 as leverage. So with credibility and Russian interests at stake, Putin is certainly playing for keeps. To help us make sense of this geopolitical chess game, either the one-sided or two-sided chess game, we've got Brett Schaefer, a fellow in international regulatory affairs at the Heritage Foundation. Brett, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
So, Brett, this administration has infamously tried to hit the reset button on Russia. The president told Vladimir that he'd have more flexibility after the 2012 elections. And he also barely balked after Putin gave asylum to arguably the largest domestic spy in American history. Now Russia is standing between the U.S. and UN Security Council approval on Syrian action. What does this all add up to? Is this, in the end, a result of a poorly executed and thought-through reset?
Well, the Russian reset policy that the administration was very proud of early on in its first term has clearly failed. The U.S. has repeatedly made accommodations to Russia. You mentioned a number of them, but some other ones where the U.S. Was pivotal in letting Russia join the World Trade Organization. The U.S. also pulled out its missile defense prospects and plans for Czech Republic and Poland. The U.S. also basically just stood aside while the Russians invaded Georgia. So the U.S. has repeatedly accommodated Russia, stepped back, and refused to be a barrier to Russia's ambitions in a number of different areas. And you have this situation here where the administration has put a lot of credibility on the line made requests of Russia to try and meet the administration halfway, try and put pressure on Assad to do a number of different things in regards to the treatment of his own civilians, and also to not use weapons of mass destruction and chemical weapons in this case. And the Russians repudiate him repeatedly.
Yeah,
this
Brett,
is a
You've defined our problems well. We've unilaterally disarmed, pulled out of places in Eastern Europe. You're absolutely correct. What, in light of all of this and recent developments, what's the best possible outcome for the president in Russia then? How does he go into these talks, whether he has a side talk with Putin, there's talk that might happen? What is the best outcome for this president and our country as it pertains to his wishes in Syria?
He's going to achieve nothing in regards to Syria when he's on the trip to Russia. The Russians have been adamant. The administration has been trying diplomatically to get Russian support for putting pressure on Assad for 2 years now. They have made no progress whatsoever. Russia's repeated tactic is to say, well, you have to go to the UN Security Council, where, of course, Russia has a veto. That means that nothing is going to happen. They do this because that is where they can control the agenda and can constrain the options that are available to the United States. You're going to see this tactic repeated. You heard that Putin said, we will consider other actions if the U.S. does indeed follow through on military strikes with Syria. That probably includes providing assistance, whether that assistance is military or not, or whether it's directly to Syria or through proxies in other client states and other allies like Iran. Who knows? But this is a situation where the administration has repeatedly butted its head up against the wall. I do not expect them to make any progress.
Well, I think we're getting to a pretty clear answer here, and I want to ask my friends at the table this question, or maybe just posit this statement instead and see what you think of it. Putin's not our friend. We don't actually have that much in common with Russia on a lot of policy issues. They view themselves as inherently oppositional towards this. Obama's done a particularly bad job managing this relationship, but I don't think anybody thinks there's a whole lot of common ground that's going to be had on a lot of these issues.
No respect. Vladimir Putin has no respect for President Obama. And say what you will about their moral grounding and their position on geopolitical issues around the world. Of course, Russia finds itself in a place antagonistic to the United States. But one thing you can appreciate about Vladimir Putin is his clarity. We know exactly where he stands. We know exactly where Russia stands on a whole host of issues. And where does America stand? Where does President Obama stand on Syria? The truth is, after a week and a half of dithering and back and forth, I really don't know what President Obama wants.
We're still hoping he's going to give us our Super Bowl ring back.
Right, that's it. Don't steal my Misfit story.
Oh,
that
sorry.
is the one issue that I think, regardless of which sign you guys are going to throw up, if you want to invade Syria or not, whatever the issues, I think that's the one issue we can all agree on here, is that there has been a serious lack of leadership. And you're right, Putin is incredibly stronger. I think anybody, even if you go back to the situation on Saturday's speech, I do think the president's speech today was stronger than one that we've seen in the what we've seen in the past is one in Sweden. But if you go back to his decision to deflect the congressional authority, that was absolutely passing the buck, whether or not you agree with it or not. He was diffusing the responsibility on the Congress.
Well, on those lines, I want to put up one more clip of President Putin in that interview. He said, President Obama hasn't been elected by the American people in order to be pleasant to Russia, and your humble servant, meaning himself, hasn't been elected by the people of Russia to be pleasant to someone either.
That's for sure.
Yeah, you know what he is right
That's
there?
for sure.
He's correct.
He is correct.
That is accurate.
He's also putting the interest of his country first. Not that our president isn't. I mean, I give him the benefit of the doubt, but he understands that this is a zero-sum game on the global stage, and he's staring down our president.
He doesn't have any
down.
incentive to join our side on this. I mean, they've got business operations in Syria, and he's got an opportunity to embarrass America on a global stage. On what planet are we living where we think that he has any incentive to get into bed with us on this? It's not going to happen, and he's exactly correct. And for us to continue to even expect something different is ludicrous.
All he has to do is talk about possibly reducing a couple of nukes, and we start getting all excited about it. Like
we've wavered too much where he looks good in his country because he does look strong and competent. We've wavered enough where he has nothing to gain or lose at home to not just stay.
No, absolutely. So we agree that we're looking weak and Putin's posturing in a strong way. Brett, I want to go back to the beginning of this segment where our President Obama said everyone's credibility is in line, not just his, American people, Congress, the world. What do you make of this statement and what he's attempting to do by saying it's not his red line, it's everybody's?
It was a bizarre statement because if you go back and look at the video clips, it's very, very clear that the president himself established a red line. He said, my expectations would change, my calculations would change, not the world's, not the international communities. It's quite clear that he himself thought that there was a red line and he himself abided by it. And for him to now try and escape responsibility on this issue is is just mind-boggling. Now, the other issue that is at stake here is what exactly is going on in terms of responsibility. He's kicked the ball over to Congress on this issue. He's basically leaked out a majority of our broad military strategy in terms of the military strikes, and that's going to undermine their effectiveness going forward.
Absolutely.
So so this entire strategy, this entire process over the past 2 weeks has been one of complete mismanagement of the policy and how the U.S. can maximize its impact if military strikes are actually conducted.
No, well, Brett, I think unfortunately, we got to cut it off there. No, I think you're dead right. And at some point, what President Putin is doing is owning it. We've talked about that. He's owning it, and our president refuses to own this, even if he does share the responsibility with a lot of other folks. Brett, thank you very much for your help on this topic tonight.